And we are live, everybody. Hello, everyone. Today we have Ryan Carniato and Michael Rawlings, who are core team members of the Marko framework development team. Right, guys?
Yeah.
For sure.
Today we were focusing on Marko, which is a framework which is new to me. I've heard of it from Ryan, and seems like it's one of the good overlooked frameworks. I think even Dan Abramov mentioned that it's one of the underdogs right now, which is a very, very promising framework, right?
Well, we hope so. Yeah, it's a little bit different of a framework in that Marko has actually been around for quite some time. It was developed at eBay, and in the early 2010s, like 2012, 2013 time period, and then. But it was developed a little bit differently. It was developed with multi-page apps in mind, essentially to fit eBay's use case. eBay being an e-commerce site, wasn't necessarily looking for the most app-like experience. What was important is loading pages, conversions, just performance. Sorry about that. I will quit Discord here. But more or less. It was developed kind of very much for the specific need, and it makes it very different than some other frameworks you might be accustomed to, like
React, for example.
Because
I think the majority of my audience is familiar with React, and I also work with React only. So yeah, that's what value will it bring to React developers? Could you tell a little bit about that?
Basically, it's funny because this is an older idea, but it's getting some attention again now. Is kind of like a no JavaScript first kind of mentality. Like the idea, you might have seen some newer libraries come out recently, like Astro for static sites, or Elder JS for static site generation. But Marko is basically the dynamic version of that. And as I said, it's funny talking about it that way because Marko's been around for such a long time. It was built from the ground up with this use case in mind, basically being able to ship less JavaScript. We don't have to ship all your components. We don't have to ship, you basically write your app like a normal app. And that's why we chose HackerNews to show you this. And then the compiler is smart enough to just send only the JavaScript that's really needed to the browser. I don't know.
So we don't have to think about optimizations regarding the bundle size. It's all optimized by design.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea here. Michael could probably add some more. I'm actually the newest member on the team. I've only been with Marko team for about a year, but he's actually he's been on the team I think for like 5 years now. So
yeah,
let's
in some regard, you don't have to think about it because it does not send things that are just totally unnecessary. But it's not like a silver bullet or anything. You still do have to pay attention to bundle sizes, and if you're bringing in some giant dependencies, it's not going to magically get rid of those if you're actually using them in the browser.
So we're going to have a demo today where we're going to build a HackerNews clone using Marko, and hopefully we'll see. Will it be visible? I suppose there is probably a similar demo done in React. How can we measure the difference?
Yeah,
or will we just see that?
I'm hoping we just kind of go along, get a feel for the developer experience, and then at a certain point we'll see how far along we get on it, because obviously there's lots of little details. But we'll just do a production build, take our finished app, and actually do a little look and see how it behaves compared to we could pull up a Next.js example or whatnot. There's those are generally good comparison points because Marko it's both a multi-page app framework at its core, and it's also server rendered. Basically the whole thing just works with server rendering without much additional thoughts. So it's good to compare it to other server rendering frameworks like Next or Nuxt or SvelteKit or whatnot.
Okay, so to be clear, what are we doing today? We're going to build a server-side rendered clone of HackerNews using Marko. Is it a good description?
Yeah, that's a pretty good description. As I said, it's a Marko app, so the server and the client side just kind of blend, but you'll see that as we develop it. But yes, it will be server rendered.
Awesome. Okay, I'm adding your screen to this stream, and we are good to go.
Right.
I'm
Okay.
gonna check the chat from time to time. If we have questions, I will try to squeeze them in so that we cover them during the live coding, if that's okay with you.
That sounds great. Yeah, I imagine there'll be a few little pauses here because I'm really just starting right from scratch here. So I'm going to try and just start by initializing a project here, which we basically have a init command, like a lot of frameworks here, Marko init, and this should let me, let's just call it Marko HN maybe, or let's go Marko HackerNews, okay?
Sounds good.
And I'm just going to take the default template here. It's going to take a second to install. This both copies the template down and installs it, kind of similar to your, CLI tools for like create React app or whatnot.
What are the non-default ones that it provides? What are the templates that it has?
Oh, the default ones. There's a few different ones. I don't know. Michael, do you have a better grip on which ones we actually have?
Yeah, so we have actually, if you go to the Marko JS examples repo, that's where it pulls all the templates from. So basic is kind of the default template, and that's what we're going to see here. It's basically just a single page with a nifty little component on it. But other than that, we've got examples that are using Express, examples that are using Webpack or Rollup. We have a Beat sample. So, and then there's also what we call our language guide, which is just kind of like a kitchen sink of a bunch of different components that are using different features of Marko. So there's a number of different things in there. If you're actually starting an app, this default starter is probably our recommended one, because there's not a whole lot in there. And it uses our Marko serve and build CLI tools, which basically are just a dev environment to give you live reloading for this server rendered app. And then the build builds a dist directory with your Node application.
So while we were talking, sorry. Yeah. I wanted to say that while we were talking, Ryan already created the bootstrapped application. We saw the default app with this little demo of changing the colors of the logo, which I think is a bit cooler than the React one.
Yeah,
with just the spinning logo.
Yeah,
kind of fancy.
Yeah. Michael has a bit of an artistic flair. You can see that in all of our kind of materials. He also did most of the design on the website, and it kind of reflects here too. Yeah, so this is just like a mouse effect, and it's kind of cool because obviously that's like a CSS effect. But what I'm doing is I'm just installing a couple other dependencies I want to use for here. Like I want to use node fetch. But essentially this demo, just to kind of get this like base template, just get a kind of feel for before I delete everything and start over again. It just has, it basically shows a Marko page index, which is your / route, right? This is file-based routing using Marko serve. And more or less, this simple example has a app layout, which is more or less just our HTML document. There's some.
Could you please remove all the other panels so that it's the code takes a little bit more space?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So essentially, can I just the other way? Yeah. Okay. Essentially. What we have going on here is the entry point of our app. And you can see it's just an HTML document. There's a few things that we're going to have to get used to. Marko's interpolation syntax is very similar to like tag template literals. It uses $. And this is actually how we insert like the body or like props.children equivalent for React developers. So the syntax is definitely a little bit to get used to at first. There's also a style block here, but we'll focus more on the specific syntax when we go into making the HackerNews demo, because then we'll get to add it piece by piece. But what I wanted to just kind of show here for a second with the whole layout is we just created a shared layout for the page, and then this mask component. Is doing a little bit of stuff and showing Marko's syntax again with classes. You know what? I think actually it'd be better if I just get right into the HackerNews demo and we build these pieces piece by piece. Because while this is a good
That's
demo
cool.
to see stuff kind of piece by piece, this probably looks like a lot of Greek for people not familiar with Marko. And I think it'd be better just to really appreciate it by just starting with the basics here. So I'm just gonna actually clear out my source folder here and just kind of get started on this. Actually, I'm just gonna delete everything. So now we just have an empty source folder with a pages directory. We need the pages directory because this is how we do our file-based tracking. So
yeah, that preceded my question. That do we need to conform to some sort of folder structure by default?
Technically,
Only the
no.
pages?
Like if you go to the package JSON, it is actually the build and dev commands are pointing to source pages. So you could make that any directory that you wanted to, but that's how this example project is set up.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So first thing we're going to do is we're going to just make an index.marko file. And what is an index.marko file? Well, it's basically an HTML file. I actually went on, I think it was Vue's HackerNews demo, and just like went view source and just like copied out their HTML. That seemed like the easiest starting point for Marko, rather than trying to like build up the components. It's really easy to start with Marko by just thinking HTML is my idea. So I've got some stuff here that I've gathered, but this is literally just an HTML document that I copied more or less. So let's just stick that HTML document in here. Oh, interesting. Anyways, it's weird spacing. Anyways, okay, so we've got our HTML document, and I'm also went there and I made a I also grabbed their CSS file from the Vue one. Again, this, pretend you had a designer. This is where probably a lot of work goes, but it's not really where we're going to spend most of our time here because I'm just bootstrapping it. So essentially, our index page here has a style, which is a CSS file, and then we have our index.marko. Now, if I
did you refer to the CSS already somewhere, or it pulls it in automatically?
It pulls it in automatically because of naming convention. I'll show you a bit more as we kind of extract stuff out a bit. But essentially, if you have an index page, it'll look for, index component, it will look for style.css in the same folder.
Okay.
So let's just
to add to that, it actually does look for style dot literally any extension. So if you're using a preprocessor or something, it'll pick up like stylus or less or sass or whatever.
Oh, and it comes batteries included. So by default, it already supports CSS, sass, and stylus and whatnot.
It supports any style extension, but you would need to set up your build tooling to handle those different syntaxes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. We already have an app running, and we just copied HTML. So
yeah.
the first thing is that you work with literally just HTML. That's the first good thing about Marko.
Yeah,
cool.
Exactly. So, this isn't really doing a whole lot right now. If I try to navigate, all the links are gonna not do anything or break, more or less, like they're just pointing to nowhere. So let's kind of start setting up our kind of concept of app. And I showed this before when in the demo app. This is actually a pretty good pattern in general, because a lot of times your pages share layout, right? So I'm just going to make a layout dot Marko, and that will help us kind of split this thing out, right? So, and
for example, the header can go into the layout.
Exactly, and layout.style.css, and that's the naming convention we use here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at index.marko, and basically, the news view is the news view. Everything else in here, though, can kind of go into our layout. And I'm going to grab the bottom two, which I don't think there's anything special here. I think it was like this. Is it the first div? Yeah, the main and stuff is inside. Yeah, so just close it up like that, and then let's put that in here. Right. So, and then obviously our body content needs to go right here. So in Marko, We're using the current Marko 4, Marko 5 API. We do have a new API that's coming out, or we have a preview on. But for this example, it's just easier for me to use the existing stuff that's well documented. We're going to use our input, and input is like props. It's just kind of this floating thing that comes into every template, and it's what gets passed in. And Marko doesn't call it props children; it calls it props render body, and that's because it basically evaluates at this time. It's not a it's not
kind
like
of a function.
It's kind of a function, exactly. And my other framework, it's funny because I use props children like that in Solid, but essentially when they came up with this years ago, they were like, that it kind of they felt best articulated the design goal rather than like something like children, which suggests something static. But yeah, that's basically the concept here. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Okay, I have
need to use
questions.
a dynamic tag here.
Sorry, Michael?
I said he does need to use a dynamic tag. So he's jumping between JSX and Marko a lot, I know. So one of the differences in Marko is that we use this dynamic tag syntax for pulling in like body content. And that is kind of unique to Marko because it allows the compiler to know that this is not just like text content that's being interpolated, or like literally in JSX, you could be putting anything in that interpolated context. Marko's a little bit more strict about what you can put in there. So there's a different syntax when you're putting like Marko content in there. We use the dynamic tag.
So, for example, the render body is the Marko dynamic tag thing.
Well,
it's not just regular interpolation.
Right.
Yeah. Basically, you see the tag syntax here. We're actually it's like you said, it's like a function. We're almost passing the component instance into this tag to say, use this tag to render this.
Okay.
You could think about it like in JSX, any capital variable, is essentially a dynamic tag in JSX. You could think about the children coming in as like a dynamically created component. So
yeah,
you
that's
would use
a good intuition.
You could think about that, in JSX, like if you had like a capital children variable that came in, using it as a tag in that sense, rather than just interpolating it in as like some content that we don't know what it is.
Does it actually work like this for all the elements, like span and UL and main also work like sort of JSX function calls that internally get called somewhere?
No, so the compiler actually for the server, it just becomes a bunch of string concatenation essentially. In the browser, we're currently using a VDOM. So if it does actually create vnodes in the browser for these different HTML elements. Our new compilation target that we're working on actually uses an approach similar to Solid, where we pull out all the static parts into a template that gets cloned. So that's actually going to be a little bit more like the server in that there's no nodes actually created for those native elements.
Got it. So now I assume that we want to wrap the index page into a layout component that we just defined, right?
Exactly. And that's what I've been kind of doing in the background. I've just been kind of playing around with, updating this, because I said I grabbed it from Vue, and I just kind of mostly, sometimes side scrolling doesn't work well. Just mostly been kind of doing that. But yeah, I'm just tweaking our shared layout component. I'm saying, yeah, built with Marko. And then our main index, I have now wrapped in our layout component. And that's it. Marko has auto component detection. So you don't have to import anything. You can just, it's called layout. Here's layout, right?
And the folder is called components, and this is where it will try to look for components.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I've wrapped it with a layout. I've tweaked this. And the other thing is I moved the style into the layout. That's why it's here, because essentially now all the pages can share this, right? So
what if you would have components, header logo component inside of it? Can you have nesting inside of components?
believe so. Structurally, it
Yes.
scans.
How would it be parsed?
What exactly are you asking?
So let's say I have a, like, let's say complex component, some sort of form that I'm reusing every now and then. For example, email submit form, and it contains an input and a button. And then this particular form has an input and a button designed specifically for it. So I would want to have inside of the components folder, email form folder, in which I would have.
Okay, yes, so you can do that. So Ryan's using a flat structure here, but you can actually create a layout directory. And under that, you could have another components folder that would only be components for that layout component. You can build them.
I can do it. Cool. How would it look when I use them? Because right now it's just layout component. How would it affect the naming of the component? Because I assume that
it wouldn't. So you would still use the layout component in the page, just like you are, and then the layout component would use the input component and the footer component. And the way it works is actually pretty similar to the way node module lookups work. The closest components are going to be the ones that are looked or discovered first. So the page actually would not be able to see, assuming that you were nesting this under a layout directory, would not be able to see the input or the footer. Those components would only be visible to the layout component itself. And it would just use them by their name, just like we're using the layout component from the page.
Awesome. Got it.
Okay. So our demo's back. So see, now it says built with Marko. So proof that I actually changed some stuff here. And yeah, we're still just showing this HTML. And here's the thing is, next step, though, is not found, right?
Exactly.
If you see my component here, it's just using these links anchored to a place that doesn't exist. So how do we deal with that? Well, the easiest way to deal with that is, let's rename this, is let's make a dynamic row.
Similar to Next.js.
Now, I mean, it's not doing anything because it's always serving it, but yes, now we have a dynamic route. Yeah, it's serving the same page for all of these. So yeah, of course, this doesn't help us a ton. So we need to kind of get going onto the next piece here, because now we have the dynamic route. We have to interface with it, and I'm trying to see here. The easiest way for us to be able to do that is going to basically add some code in our Marko file to deal with the routing. And one thing we can do here is we can define a static function, and this might sound a little bit different, but essentially this is almost like a class prototype function. You can think of, like, it's basically something that exists for all instances. And I'm gonna make a get page function, here, and this will kind of help us. Actually, maybe I think I'll go here. Basically, Marko's Marko serve basically exposes the route parameters and the route query. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to basically pretend this function receives a query, and there's probably nicer ways to do this, libraries that do query parsing, but I'm going to simply look at the string and more or less, going to basically go, like, if it doesn't include the page, we're on page 1. Otherwise, and again, this is about as hacky as it gets. I'm sure there are nice things to handle route parameters that I'm not using here, but I think this will make it kind of really evident what I'm doing. I'm just going to grab the page, right? So so this is basically takes the query coming in and grabs the page. And what we're going to do here is we're going to Marko's scriptlet thing, which is basically just dynamic code. You can actually just embed JavaScript wherever you want. inside your template, but in case I'm just going to do it top level here, I'm going to go page equals get page and input.query. So essentially,
and it's the node code. It's not browser code that you're writing right now.
Yeah, don't worry too much about that per se. Just we're writing a component that takes input and it's getting the route parameters.
I just thought that the browser APIs these days have the query params thingy that allows you to parse the query on its own. So if it would be browser, then you could just use that. If it's Node, then I think not so much. Yeah, it doesn't include it, I think.
I don't know. Have those been ported back into V8 and into Node? I'm not actually 100% sure, but
yeah, I don't know either. Maybe whatever. Yeah, let's continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So and just for the sake of this, I'm actually So now this will hopefully get ourselves our page. I think I can just go like this if we want to just see that the page is working, right? I can just do this, right? If I just do that now, and I'm gonna open this. I never trust hot reloading for some reason, but if I go here, no, am I not updating? Oh, right, of course. You can see it here. It's because my links are fixed, right? We got to do some more stuff with page, right? This is copied from static HTML, so we're literally we're literally hard coding the page to page 2. It never gets past that. So what we need to do is basically say that it's the current page +1, right, for the next link, and just use this template. Yeah. And there we go. So now, next page is page +1. Now, this is actually...
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I was just going to say, you forgot the curly brackets around the template string.
Yeah, you have to get used to that. I go back and forth between JSX, but like, look at the page number in here. Now, page number is incrementing like we expect.
Right? All right.
So we're definitely checking our pages out here. And so now we can basically go here, and if we go to news, oh no, we lose it. So let's fix that URL slightly. It should actually be, we need the path name here too to actually get the right one. So it should be input.pathname, and this all comes from the router here, right? So we have path name and then the page, and if that's all fine, we should now be able to go page 1, 2, 3 on the index, go to news, and page 1, 2, 3, 4 on new, go to show. Okay, so this is just the basic routing now working, but we're still not doing anything here, right? We're just switching our page numbers, but serving the same page over and over again. Now that we have this harness, though, we can actually look at fetching some real data. So, I'm going to use the HackerNews API. There's a couple that I've been using in other demos and stuff, and I'm just going to put it in a maybe like a lib folder. It doesn't really matter where this goes. I'm just kind of picturing this as kind of like a global service, and I'm going to make a API.js. And instead of like the HTML, instead of typing this part all out, I did kind of prepare this one, and I'll just show you what I did here. It's just probably easier to kind of look at this, because this is just JavaScript. There's nothing too special here, right? Because our app's isomorphic, I loaded in node fetch. But generally speaking, there's some mappings to the URLs back to the particular listings, and then basically I just export a function that hits the API endpoints and returns the promise, essentially. So this is just really quite basic. Basically, the user API actually had to go to a different source because for some reason Node HN API doesn't do the user API, but this is a kind of implementation detail that's not terribly important here. Basically, we hit 3 REST endpoints, and we use these functions to generate the promise that fetches them, right? It's just a fetch request on those.
So we have So we have three async functions that return the HackerNews API results.
Yeah.
The users list, the stories list, and wait a second. One particular story for the ID, the list of stories for the type, and the user by its ID.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is all the API we need. This is why this is a great example, because it's so simple. There isn't really much extra to managing this. So I'm just, I basically have this already set up, and I made myself a little API reference just because it's sometimes difficult to remember all the fields. But more or less, we're going to just take this very simple API and import it onto our main page here. So how do we do the import? Well, you've seen this before with get stories, and we're going to get it from lib API. Yeah, so it's just a JavaScript import statement. So now let's start doing this, and you can see there's some stuff here in the static HTML. What I'm going to do is introduce you all to Marko's async tag, or await tag, sorry, rather. And this is going to be doing our fetching for us. It actually does a lot of really great stuff. But Marko's a built-in tag that literally just takes in promises and then handles the different cases for you. We've had this in Marko for years, I believe. I don't know when it was first introduced, but I feel like it's been there since almost the beginning. Because
this is so cool, but it needs to handle so many states. It needs to handle the loading state, it needs to handle the fail state, and the succeeded state. So it's at least 3.
And I'll show you how we do that in a second. This one is going to take the current params, and this is off the route again. And because we called our route stories, that's why it's called stories. Do you understand what I mean? Like, it's basically input.params and then whatever the parameter is. In this case, it's stories, or top if it's not present. And then we're going to pass in the page. So that's how we get the type. And then the page is the page that we previously got. And then I'm going to add a little thing here, which we'll worry about later, but it's just a way of telling Marko how to handle the way the content's inserted. But yeah, so the main part of our content, well, I have this loading spinner here, right? So the first thing we need to do is show our placeholder. And in Marko, we have these things called attribute tags, which are basically the equivalent to named slots in something like Vue or Svelte. But in React, you can just think of this as like almost like passing render props or something. Like, basically, we can pass markup as attributes in Marko, which is something you don't find in all templating languages. Like, it's not as easy to do that. It's a little different doing that in Vue or Svelte, where in JSX, you're custom, you can just go like, oh yeah, this attribute equals some JSX. In Marko, we have an actual tag syntax for that. So
okay, it looks like it's decorator syntax that TypeScript, for example, uses, but you use it for a different thing, which is like, it reminds me of how I think Jinja templates work in Django, where you have named like placeholders in the templates. Am I right about it?
Yeah, except it's the parent component knows how to parse them. Like, they're not, they end up getting just bundled up as like almost normal attributes. So they're not special. They're special to the parent component.
Wait, let me wrap my head around it. Like, it's a very unusual syntax. So somewhere inside of the async component, there is a placeholder, just like placeholder called placeholder that it's using somewhere. And you can provide the content for this placeholder by using it as a children of the async component and passing it as a contents to the placeholder element that you pass there. Can you scroll up to this part where you do this? Am I right? Did I get it correctly? What is going on there?
Michael, do you want to attempt explain this probably better than I am right now?
Yeah, so if we want to go back to explaining things in terms of React, for you and your viewers, maybe that's the easiest way to do it.
Please do. Yes.
So if you had let's say a layout component, right? And in React and you needed to be able to pass like multiple slots in, you would probably maybe have something like, let's just say header, body, and footer as attributes. And in React, children is just like this special attribute, right? Like if you didn't ever want to do like a nesting syntax, you could just say tag and then a child prop equals and then some JSX, right? So we mentioned before, with the dynamic tag, that Marko wants to know what is, I guess the equivalent of JSX content versus just some like JavaScript data, right? And so that's essentially what these are like content blocks. And they actually do on the receiving side. So if the await were like a user tag, because you can use these attribute tags with custom tags that you're writing yourself. But it actually does have a render body property on it. So you would get input.placeholder.render body. And that's something that you could use with the dynamic tag to render that content. Does that make sense, or do you have more questions?
I can't formulate the questions. I'm just sitting here with just a big feeling of unfamiliarity with this thing.
Yeah, what Ryan's doing here is kind of like that JSX equivalent. So we're not extending the JavaScript language in any way, right? So we don't have JSX in Marko. So you can't just create, these JSX blocks and pass them as attributes. So the attribute tags actually give you a syntax to be able to pass, like rich content as attributes to a tag.
Okay, let's say layout. We already have a component. Can we send some parameter this way through the @ and then foo, bar, whatever, to this component, to our custom component?
Yes.
And we'll get it through
it would
the
receive that as input.foo. Say you did a foo attribute tag, @foo as the tag, it would receive input.foo. And that would be an object that has any attributes that you set on that foo tag, and then a render body that represents that content. And then the layout could render that render body just like it's rendering input.render body.
Awesome. I think it clicked now. I got it.
Yeah, and I was hoping to kind of show you with the JSX, because there's two syntaxes here. There's the attribute tags, which are literally just attributes that can do, like in our case, this loading thing could just be, in JSX, you can just picture that it's being passed to placeholder. But the other one here is, and you'll see this a couple times in our example, when attributes have pipes around something like this, it's actually a render prop. So it's Marko's syntax for like passing story into whatever we're doing, so we can use it. Like it's sorry, that's a bad example. Like it gives us a way of almost calling then with this argument. So Marko's kind of interesting because you got to picture the time period. This is 2014. Marko kind of came out. React was still working out its patterns. So they actually developed almost completely independently without influencing each other. So like sometimes, this is a very different world when you see someone having attacked this before React had like a solution or pattern there. We were doing, on the Marko side, similar things, but with a slightly different context. So Marko's templating API is actually quite powerful. It basically gives you all the power of JSX, like maybe even more so than other template DSLs you find in other template libraries. There's probably some reason behind that, and but generally, like we have syntax for basically render props and syntax for like passing elements as attributes.
And yeah, syntax for render props is basically an alternative syntax for the function, sort of.
Yes.
Wow, that's very interesting. What about the regular arguments? Like, for example, you're passing class or ref. Are those only the reserved attributes, and they're not going to end up as just input values that you pass to a component? Is it only the attribute name that you can use to pass data to the component?
Well, no. You can also just pass normal ones. Like this client reorder is just an attribute that I'm passing to the component.
It will end up same way as, for example, placeholder. It's two syntaxes to do the same thing.
Yeah, it'd be
so you would have input.client reorder equals true, since that's a Boolean attribute, and then placeholder would be this object that has a render body property, and when you render that render body using the dynamic tag, you would get this loading div.
It's because these can also have attributes. Like if it was like, pretend like delay 5 milliseconds or something, like you can actually pass attributes, or you can pass like attributes to the attribute tags as well. So it's an object.
Wow. High order attributes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
We're using a built-in here, just because what I wanted to show here is this is just comes with Marko out of the box. We're just awaiting the stories, and then we're showing a placeholder when it hasn't loaded, and then we're thenning, and we're going to have the story here. Hopefully,
and you're getting it through this vertical line syntax. You get the story to actually use the fields from it and the layout. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm hoping that this just works. But let's see here. What we're going to be looking for here is actually on the network tab. I want to see that that we're actually no, it's not going to be on the network tab. Let's just keep on going. We trust me, we should be getting the stories now. So basically, I think it's time for us to actually look at rendering a story on the page, and you can tell there's a lot of list items. I've been scrolling through this for quite a while, and it's actually kind of bit of a pain. So let's just like delete most of these and just look at one of them or something, right? Because this is the fun part with
Shouldn't we just move it to some component because we'll use it later anyway? Because the layout is already there. Or
yeah, I mean we could. We could move it to a separate component. We might be reusing this again. We might not be. I'm just gonna, for sake of this right now, just kind of just do this. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to make a for loop here, and inside our for component, we're going to basically list over our list items, and if right now, they're all just the same thing. We haven't done any kind of advanced templating. But if we go for, and again, this is story of stories. This is what I was referring to before, where we're going to see this again. Pipe what we call tag parameters, so that each iteration of the for loop gets its own story in this context. But let's see if this is going to do what I want it to do. What am I doing here? Let's see, did I cause an error here? Sometimes. Oh, okay. Sorry. Let me restart dev mode. We've been just running dev mode in the background here. What did I break? Stories is not defined. Oh, it's because it should be stories. We're still getting the full set of stories, not the single story, right? Compile.
About that, by the way, can we use TypeScript with that? Like, can we have types so that you don't like avoid typos and such?
We don't have TypeScript in the templates yet. We are working on it. It is on our roadmap. TypeScript in the templates would obviously be very nice, but we do not have that right now. We have completion on stuff like component names and whatnot, but TypeScript, obviously, it's the JavaScript parts that aren't getting the coverage we'd like here. In any case, then stories, right? So you can see now you can tell my request is working because we have the same story spit out 30 times because that's how much the page is. So let's actually look at making this work with the actual data. So, let's see here. I think this one, let's just story.points. And I think this one is, sorry. It's always the fun part about zooming in, and I realized I could show more of my screen, but I'm actually going to grab that for reference in a second in case I get get lost here a little bit, but actually, I guess I can just go story.url, and there's a reason I put this in here at the beginning here, right? Domain user, okay. What do we got here? Story.domain. This is the less fun part, but we're just making this into our template language, and same thing you would do pretty much in any solution. We just have to go in story.timeago, I want to say. And this is story.id. The one fun part of copying it from HTML, I do have to change it to interpolated template literals where I need to. Comments count. And let's see, did I get most of this? Comments count, time ago, story user. Oh, of course, need the title. Story.title. All right. And if everything went right, we should be looking at a HackerNews page that's showing us unique stories. Oh, there we go. Yeah. And when we go to the next page, it should also, okay, I am not updating something properly on the pages because this is working, but clearly I'm not updating this. So
it's not refetching.
Oh, it is actually refetching. I just missed this UI. See, okay, there we go. So let's go back.
Okay.
So we got crafting interpreters on page 1. Page 2, Commodore 64 ads. Page 3 is this, and what you're seeing is you see our nice little loading state, and this is cheesy. It's just that div, but you can definitely see the data fetching and the loading state as we navigate around our HackerNews app. Obviously, I didn't implement the back button or whatnot, but we now actually have a working front page for HackerNews. We can go to the different categories. We can see them. We have loading state and whatnot. How are we doing so far for time, just out of curiosity?
So it's 47 minutes. So I think if I stop asking questions, it feels like you can actually finish the whole application in the next 15 minutes or so. So you can actually make the whole, am I right? Because the only thing left, as I see, is to implement the single page. That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
And the user.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let me just start doing that. Maybe we can ask some questions and Michael can kind of answer them as I start. It's a lot of the same thing. We're just kind of copying and pasting the template and editing it. Let me just start doing that. And maybe if anyone has some questions, Michael can answer them.
I can check in the chat if we have any.
Let me.
So far, there was one answered question about if the placeholder, or not placeholders, but what are those things with the attributes? The attributes. Yeah, they're similar to Svelte name slots.
They are almost exactly equivalent to Svelte's name slots. Yes.
Yeah, and it seems like we don't really have any other questions.
That's fine. Yeah, if we want to make a route for the page, all we have to do is we'll make a stories folder and then put an ID in it here, and this is going to be /stories/ID, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then going back to our reference, I did grab the stories page, and I don't need all of this time, right? I just need this because we already did the layout, which I think is Is it the, no, it's the first div. So let's just do that. I'm just going to go a little faster this time, but it's basically the same game again, right? We're just doing this, and obviously, let's just see if this. Yeah, I mean, this is just the static page, obviously. But we can see that now we can go here, load the page, and then we want to set up the dynamic data for this. This takes. Basically, the thing we have to recognize is that we're going to need a component for this one because comments are recursive, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's going to be a single comment, right? Because they can basically loop around. For the page itself, we don't actually need too much consideration here, because we have the story ID right from the thing, but we do have to fetch the data again. So we're going to basically, very similar to what we did before, we have our item view, and then we are going to, let's see what we're going to do. I guess I'll stick it right in here. We're going to put our await tag again, and this time we're going to go get story singular from input.params.id, and this is very similar to what we did before. Actually, I got to import it, right? Import get story API, whatever, and then we're gonna put our then tag. I don't appear to have from my static HTML a nice placeholder for this one. It's fine. Let's go. Then we want the story itself, and what do I miss? Then I gotta.
And not using the placeholder, I think, will be kind of a nice way to show off another feature of Marko. So Marko's await tag can operate in two modes. With the client reorder, basically it flushes out all the content that it can, except for what's wrapped in that await tag. And then when the content finally comes in, it flushes out that content along with a small, very tiny script that just moves it in place of the placeholder. However, if you don't use, and so that allows you to actually use a placeholder with server rendering, right? You need, some sort of JavaScript to reorganize the page after the fact. If you don't use client reorder, then it just uses in-order streaming. So what that means is we're going to flush the beginning of the layout up through this div that has this item view class. And then it's going to pause there until the await tag is finished. So it actually does stream out the HTML in order. It doesn't require any JavaScript for that to work. And you get the page flushing out as much content as it can to get the user some content to see, to get assets and everything to kick off the downloading of those. But the async content then comes in as it's ready. And if you do have multiple async tags on the page for both scenarios, they are kicked off in parallel. So there's no waterfall created with that.
What about nested
async? There is a waterfall there, because we can't start rendering until we have that data. But
you can have them.
If they're siblings, then there are no waterfalls created.
All right, we're getting there. So now we have our title showing for our second page. If I go here, you can see that. I just did almost the same thing I did before. Comments are fun because they are recursive. I'm just going to keep one recursive example in here just so that I can copy it over, but obviously comments are, yeah.
So we just had the question again, are types available? Not today, but that is something that is on our roadmap. We've been researching how to best implement that, and we are going to be taking a similar approach to the way Svelte implements TypeScript.
What do you mean a similar approach? What is
so
special about it?
basically, we're going to leverage the TypeScript compiler as much as possible. So we're going to translate these Marko templates to something that looks like JSX to the TypeScript compiler. And then we're just going to let TypeScript do its thing, and we'll map any warnings or errors back to the original template using source maps. So we're going to generate JSX that doesn't actually like run or do anything, but it has the structure of the template, so that TypeScript can say like, hey, you're using this thing here, and that's not the right type, or this variable is unused, or anything. So we're not really having to build like a knowledge of types, completely around the Marko templating language.
Is there any ETA on that? Like when is it going to be shipped? Like, is it
we
in
are
active
trying
development?
So yeah, we basically have our plan in place. There's a number of things that are in flight right now, and we do not currently have that on like at least the next few things that we're going to do. But it is something that people are asking for. There's maybe a possibility that someone in the community might pick it up. We're still trying to figure out when that's going to land.
Big thing is, and some people might be aware of this, is we're actually working on the next version of Marko, which is not going to be using the VDOM. It's much smaller, and it can allow even more granular hydration. So TypeScript is definitely there. We're just balancing that between basically this really new powerful version of Marko, which will have subcomponent hydration, or I guess resumable out of order subcomponent hydration eventually, and basically shrinks our runtime even further and increases the performance a ton. Basically, we're doing a sort of core rewrite on the browser side, especially that is going to have huge benefits across the board for like end user, like UX. It's essentially like a lot of performance improvements.
Nice, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I'm almost there. We have a comment component, and right now the comment component is showing all these, but I just need to get to the point where the comment component is showing itself, right? So this is a comment.
Yeah.
We have inception here, so we just need to put in the for loop. And I guess there's an if statement I'm missing here, but we want comment of input dot comment dot comments. And if everything is right, we won't need this one anymore.
This is so interesting. Such an unusual pattern to have this control flow in the layout with arguments as well. Like you're getting the comment inside of this loop.
Yeah.
This is interesting.
So what's kind of interesting about this, you don't see this a lot in frameworks at the language level. But one of our goals with the Marko language was to not have this big difference between what is language level and what is like our user created components. So we mentioned, right, that Svelte has these name slots that are kind of similar to Marko's attribute tags, and they also have like the default slot, right? So if you wanted to create an iterable, a component that renders its body multiple times with some new data, right? Because there might be a reason that you want to do that. Maybe you want to create a paginated for, right? So you can just say, here's my data, and I want you to render 3 at a time, and it handles going to the next page. Well, how do you do that? You can't use the each in Svelte anymore, right? Because that's just, it iterates over the entire list. So you actually have to switch the entire syntax that you're using to use a custom component. And Svelte is using, attributes. You've got this like let colon syntax to bring in data. With Marko, you could write a paginated for component that literally all you have to do is swap out the for the paginated for, like just the tag name, because the custom components are able to use the same syntax as the core components.
Yeah, I mean, see this in React all the time. Like as soon as you go next level, once you get past the map and you're making like a custom paginated component or a layout component, you're doing control flow in JSX.
So we just start there, right? So you don't have to do this context switch between, right? If you had to do that in React, you'd end up with like a render prop, right?
Yeah.
You'd have to switch from using a map to using a component with a render prop. Here, you're able to, whether you're doing just a basic for loop or you're doing some crazy custom looping component, right? You're able to use the same exact patterns throughout the entire language.
Yeah, which is
nice, exactly. You don't have context switch. Say that again, sorry.
Yeah, I said exactly. You don't have to context switch that much.
Right, so it does look a little bit, I think, strange or new to people that are first coming to Marko, but this is like a core concept that everything is able to take advantage of. We saw it with the await tag. We're seeing it now with for, and so. Yeah, if you have any, if you had a toggler component that conditionally renders its body, you're able to easily switch between an if or that toggle component. So we think it makes a lot of sense.
And they use the same building blocks. Like there is this vertical lines getting attributes for the function, sort of, that needs to be. I don't know how to properly elaborate it.
You could think of the render body as a function that renders. I keep saying content, and I don't know if that's necessarily the best term for it. You could think of it kind of like render props in JSX, except we don't have JSX. We can't create a function that just returns like components and whatnot. Nor do we want to, because we want it to be statically analyzable. So these tag parameters, we call them, allow you to pass data to the body of a tag.
So on line 18, the comment thingy, yeah, how do you call it? What is the lingo for it in?
We call that a tag parameter.
Tag parameter. Okay.
It is essentially a function parameter for the body content of that tag.
I'm just trying to grasp what building blocks are there for this control flow.
Yeah, so
layout-based control flow.
As far as syntax, there's you start with the basic HTML. You've got tags, you've got attributes, and that's basically all there is for HTML. But on top of that, we add all attributes are parsed as JavaScript expressions. So you see, for that input.comment.comments, for that of attribute, you don't even need to wrap that in curly braces or anything. You can use tag or template literals. Just regular strings are also just JavaScript strings. And so you've got these typed attributes essentially, and that's nothing special. Basically, every framework needs to add something like that in some form. And then we have the tag parameters, and usually that gets kind of shoehorned in other frameworks. Svelte has this like let : syntax. we really wanted attributes to be something where you're passing data to the tag. We didn't want it to be data is like coming back from the tag through those, which some of these other HTML-based frameworks kind of have like these special attributes that aren't passing data to the tag, they're receiving data from the tag.
So the flow is still top to bottom, like in React.
Right.
You don't have unidirectional data flow.
We do have the unidirectional data flow, kind of similar to React. And Dylan's actually, Dylan's on the core team, and I see him in the YouTube comments. Yeah, it uses the
it seems like he knows a lot.
Huh?
I was thinking why Dylan knows so much about Marko. Probably.
Yeah, so Dylan's here as well in the comments. But yeah, you can use any JavaScript syntax that as that supported in function arguments. So you can destructure, you can use default parameters. Basically, if you can treat it as if you were writing function arguments there in between the pipes.
All right.
Nice.
Okay, I guess.
So where are we?
Yeah, I've got it. We've got the component rendering, and we've got comments here and that are all recursively nested. And you see how there's these minus signs? We can collapse and expand them as needed. So we have 8 collapsed under here, then 1 collapse.
Nice.
So we now
probably be good to look at that class real quick.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. We missed it completely because I've noticed that Ryan is typing it, defining this class, but we were just in the discussion at the moment. Can we talk a little bit about that class?
Yeah. So Marko 5, 4, 5, 6, whatever. This is our idea of class components, or the equivalent of it. Basically, you can just define a class in your template, and this defines state. So we have lifecycle hooks, very similar to class components in React. On create is the initialization one. There's also stuff for on update and on mount. There's a few other ones. And all I've done here is I've just initialized some state, and then I've set it up. I made a helper function that toggles between the state, and then I'm binding it here. The syntax for binding the helpers is a bit, binding the event listers a little bit different. This allows us to do partials, like you can pass arguments to them. But this is just kind of the way Marko handles it for class components. We have a new API coming out for that uses only tags, similar to almost like React hooks. So we do have we soon will have like the similar analog like to the hooks or composition API. But today I'm just using our class components here, and yeah, it's as easy as just writing a class in your
it should be nameless, right? Or it doesn't matter?
It should be nameless, yes.
What if you have a bunch of, can you have a bunch of nameless classes? What will happen?
You can only have one. The compiler will error if you try to put multiple.
Do you have linters that check these kind of things? Like if you use the framework right?
So we don't have any external linters. The compiler does have what you might consider some lint rules built into it. So there's, like if you try to put like a random attribute on the if, it'll error and say like, what are you doing? So there are some things like that built in, but we are also looking at, supporting some external linters as well. We will probably, we just mentioned our strategy for TypeScript. We will probably use a similar strategy to get ESLint support in these templates as well, so that we can have like JavaScript lint rules in there as well. You can kind of define some. We do have a way to define types for, not types, but attributes, which attributes are actually available for custom components, and the compiler will error if you're using like an incorrect attribute or you're missing a required attribute or something like that as well.
Got it. How do you get the props, like the input values that we already access in the template, but what if we need them inside of the class? How would we reach for them?
This dot input
Yeah.
Nice.
This dot.
Similar to this.props in React class components.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if there's a ton of other special stuff here. I mean, at the click handler. Beyond this, I mean, this looks like stuff you're used to doing, right? Ternary operator to decide whether to show the state, some string concatenation. As I said, the for loop syntax is different, but you can see that we're discussing conditional logic.
But it's interesting. Like you access the state directly. Where does the state come from in the template? I can.
So within the like template portion, the HTML portion of this file, you're able to access input without this, state without this, and then there actually is a third one, which is component. And component actually is the equivalent of this, and so that does seem a little bit weird. And at this point, we're not going to change that, but we are moving, as Ryan said, towards this tags API approach where you don't have any like of these. There actually are no values that are just like injected into the template for the API that we're moving towards.
Okay, got it. Okay, so but another interesting thing is how the function is being called, the toggle open. So it's being referred as a string. On click is just toggle open. Would it work if instead we would pass component dot toggle open, because we can access the instance?
It would, yes. And you wouldn't need to bind it or anything because it does call it with the component instance as this. You can actually also define like an arrow function inline there as well. It's just that then I mean you could, and then you could call component dot state and set it there.
Right. More verbose in this case. Yeah. But can I just do, sorry, this is, I've seen this work in the tags API. I just haven't actually tried this in the.
Yeah, that'll work just fine. That's actually an unbound function, but then it does get called with the component instance.
Right. So the other method actually works better for like if you had a for loop, and it would.
It should be fine.
Okay.
In either case, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's funny because I've been doing a lot of work in the new tags API, and it looks a lot more like the JSX that I'm accustomed to. So it's interesting. But as I said, for today's demo, I wanted to kind of just do it as Marko today. And with just, this event handler, some state definition and stuff, we've got some stuff. Do you have any other questions looking at the template itself? Oh yeah, there's one other little thing.
What is it? I've completely overlooked it.
Is
it just a typo?
No, this is how you say like don't escape this text. This is so that we can insert. It's dangerously insert HTML.
Dangerously set in HTML.
Yeah, exactly. Except you can just do it like this. Like you can actually just like patch it in wherever you want. It doesn't have to completely control the children. You can actually interpolate it. This is like I'm gathering this is influenced by like Pug or like the other server-side templating languages that influenced Marko originally. It's kind of cool because you don't really have a good way of doing this in JSX.
But there they say it's intentional, that there is no good way of doing it. It's like it's ugly by design. Like,
but I mean,
it's an effort.
But yeah, sometimes you need it. Like in this case, we want to actually render the formatting of the posts. So if there's no other questions on that part, should I just kind of demo the app a bit here? You can kind of see.
Yeah.
I was showing you how you can compress. You can see the loading states. You can load the pages. You can kind of navigate around. Let's actually, I don't think I'm going to build much more on this. I know I didn't do the back button, but who cares? Let's
say we're done. Let's compare, or what did you want to do?
Exactly. Let's go npm run build. So we're gonna build our project here, and okay, it's built. And then npm run start, and this should grab our production build. And okay, and if all is well, yeah, looks good, doesn't it? Yeah, it just kind of comes in. We have our pages loading, different types of stories. Looks like, comments. we can compress. Okay, so we're pretty good here, I think here. So let's pull out a few other examples while we're at it. What do we want to see? Let's say next, HackerNews is a good one.
Yeah. React based.
Yeah, where was, it's funny because I actually have these links in some other presentations that I've done in the past, but I'm not next HackerNews demo. Let me, well, I'm looking for that. Let me grab Nuxt. Nuxt is very similar. HackerNews. They have an official one too, so I think this is probably what I'm looking for. See, they all look the same, right? Like there's this one. Hey, there's one I know by heart, hn.svelte.dev. Big fan of Svelte myself, so I definitely look at that one a lot. But I just kind of give the, and this one's built with SvelteKit. This is Nuxt, and let's get Next in here. I should be able to find it, you'd think. Of course, I guess
maybe try Next.js. Next is just such a common word that you're pulling out.
Yeah.
Articles.
It's funny because I is this?
It's such a common thing, like with the salary, for example. Oh, good luck looking up articles or something.
I don't think this is the one I'm wanting. No, this one's weird. I actually had a really good one that I used in a presentation not that long ago, but I am not seeing it right now. Sorry, I should have prepared finding this one. I know what.
What if you find React HackerNews demo?
Yeah,
just that.
I mean, the other way to go is you can go to HackerNews PWA. The problem is the site is outdated, and even though there's a bunch of ones here, yeah, I'm almost, yeah. This is what the site is like these days.
Okay, no, that's just unfair.
Yeah, oh man, Next is very comparable to Nuxt. I can say that much. So if you guys want a comparison, it's like Nuxt, but just like a little bit bigger. But they are very comparable.
Let's go with Nuxt. I'm fine with that.
See, I mean, you could see, if you want to kind of understand, these are server-side rendered things, right? So what happens in a Nuxt app or whatever when you do it? Like, let's click around a bit. It's a cool little transition they're doing, but right, essentially, you kind of click around, get some stories. Oh, that one is taking a while. Sometimes we can. It's not the app's fault. It's we all hit the same APIs, and they sometimes get kind of glitchy. So especially the traditional one, but you can see these apps are all the same, right? You collapse, whatever, move around. Okay, so let's just see what happens in Nuxt. So our page loads, and oh, you know what? To be fair, I need to do this in incognito window, because
yes, sure.
What happens is if you don't do this in incognito, there is a good likelihood that like my Grammarly is going to mess with us. So yeah, here we go. This is perfect. Nuxt. So on that initial page load, it loads 4 scripts and roughly works out to about 97.7 kilobytes gzipped of JavaScript you send. And then when you hover, or no, this one doesn't hover, but when you click on the next one, we load some more JavaScript and another 3 kilobytes or so, 2.5 kilobytes to load what we need for this page. And if we started on this page, yeah, it's about 97. So basically each page loads incrementally about another 3 kilobytes, and like each type of page. And essentially the core of the library is about 94 kilobytes to just render this HackerNews demo, right? Svelte I actually kind of like a lot here because they are pretty damn small. 13.4 kilobytes to render this page, and then when we go here, it actually preloads quite nicely. And we're at about 16.6 kilobytes. to load different pages. If you notice, it's actually 3.2 kilobytes to load the next page. And that's because Svelte's components are a bit larger, so it scales a bit worse. But I mean, if you're starting with library size, like for the core and the routing and stuff at 13 kilobytes, you're already like, you can afford a few larger components coming in on your page. So let's look what we've been doing here with.
Exactly. We have the baseline. Let's see how do we compare.
Okay, so let's refresh our page. Wait. Right. Why are we looking?
Okay.
There's no JavaScript.
What?
Right. I know you see the loading state. You navigate around. There's no JavaScript.
Because it was included into the HTML, and it's just the bare minimum of JavaScript that is needed. Oh,
right.
Okay.
So in this case, why would we need to do any rendering in the client or whatnot, right? Like, because I told you it's MPA, you guys aren't seeing it, but the whole page is reloading. But because the browser holds the content, like the browser has suspense built in, like sort of like it holds the suspense navigation or transitions. It basically holds the content. So what you're seeing is we load the new page so fast that you don't even see the header redraw. And then what you see is we don't wait for that async data to load. So we just stream the placeholder in. So it looks like you're just getting a loading state like you would in a client-side app. We're just streaming that placeholder in. And then as it finishes, it streams the rest in. And it can do that without like a JavaScript bundle or a runtime.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can imagine this is really beneficial for page loads when your baseline is 0 KB. This isn't the whole story, I'm going to say, because like we looked at the others, we actually have to, load JavaScript sometimes. And in this case, we just loaded JavaScript. You can see this here. We're at 15.1K when we move to the other page, right? And the reason for this is we needed to load the framework and the JavaScript to collapse this stuff in the browser.
Exactly, because of the class and the stateful thing that we had there.
Exactly. But otherwise, we wouldn't. And I mean, this is why we're working a lot on this direction with new Marko, because Marko today with this stuff is 13 kilobytes, but Marko tomorrow might be, for a page like this, might be 3 or 4 kilobytes.
So in what direction are you really moving with that? Like, what are the what is like the features that are you adding to it? From what perspective are you trying to do you get my question? Like, where are you trying to move with that?
Well, the thing is, Marko already starts from 0 JavaScript, so it already doesn't send the components to the page that it doesn't need to. This is a huge savings. So if we make our runtime smaller, this just more emphasizes that. So the direction Marko is going towards is, right now we had to ship the whole comment component because it was stateful, but we're actually moving in a direction where we can do sub-component partial hydration, which means we can actually look at your whole app and not even do it at a component level, do it even sub-component level, only ship the tiny pieces of JavaScript that are needed to do this kind of interaction. So by obviously making the runtime really small, like only a few kilobytes and tree shakeable, using compiled approaches, and then using really smart cross-template analysis, we have this ability to, as I said, remove all the static stuff. It's not just the header, in some cases. If you know that it's an MPA, if you know that you're never going to re-render most of this page on the client, why would you need to, worry about that? Like if we had some state to just toggle the visibility of this and say didn't need to re-render this text here for the comment, we don't need to include the JavaScript to render comments. Like, you can basically just have enough JavaScript to toggle a button. And
yeah, exactly.
And if we reduce the amount of component code we can do and reduce the runtime, you're looking at ultra small bundles, which means like ultra fast time to first load. Like that's our goal here, right? I don't know, Michael, if you want to speak a little bit more to it in a bit more detail, but that's like the high level of it.
Did you have any questions?
Yeah, like right now, one big question is, what are the drawbacks? Because it sounds like awesome. It's fantastic. Like, you don't load the JavaScript while it's not needed. Like, it's super quick, and it does a lot of optimizations even before you think about them.
Right. Yeah.
What are the drawbacks?
One of the probably the biggest drawback is that at least today, we we do this partial hydration based on a fairly simplistic heuristic, like does the component have a class, right? So at this point, we've only sent one comment component to the browser. But say there was something really high in the tree that had a class component associated with it. Well, in that case, we're going to send everything underneath that. And so that's one of the reasons that we're starting to look into this subcomponent hydration, so that we can
granular
more static stuff under that dynamic route. But
so we're kind of lucky that it's so. Sorry.
Go ahead.
So we were kind of lucky with this example that it looks so much optimized. So, or rather, there is a class of applications, mostly just regular websites with not so much JavaScript, which would benefit so greatly from using Marko.
So if your dynamicism is at your leaf components, Marko today does an excellent job with that, and it's going to give you a highly optimized website. If you are trying to do a spa or something like that, you essentially, that router essentially brings dynamicism up to the top level. And so in that sense, you're really not doing anything that's a whole lot different than any other framework at that point. So it really does depend on the type of application that you're building. But for a large class of applications, e-commerce, eBay.com, it's a very good fit, and it leads to a very performant page by default.
Yeah,
and it has the server side. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that when we tested partial hydration on the core of like eBay's homepage, if you try and go there, you see a bunch of ads and a bunch of stuff that gets pulled up. But about a year and a half ago, we tested how much the core rendering, Marko app was for eBay on the homepage. And it was kind of crazy. It was something like 72 kilobytes gzipped, which, to get that main page, not counting the ads and all the stuff that gets lazy loaded in.
Yeah, and it's for the actual website. It's not for the demo. It's the real eBay front page.
What do you know how easy it is to get to 70 kilobytes? Like, that's what we should be aiming for. I think there was a study that showed like that, after 3 seconds, bounce rates start getting pretty bad. And if you have a slow device like a Moto G4 or something, Jake Archibald from Google team kind of did this thing. He was showing that like if you had 350 kilobytes of JavaScript, which is the median, and you took a G4, it would take 15 seconds to kind of fully load and hydrate, which is on this mobile device. So you do a little math, you divide that by 5, let's say, to get 15 back to 3 seconds, and you take 350 back to 70 kilobytes. That's kind of where you're aiming to be, right? If you can keep your bundle under 70 kilobytes of JavaScript, you're in a pretty good place. It's just, how hard is that to do? Like, obviously, Svelte or some of the more modern frameworks do it really well, but I mean, it's Next.js can't offer you a 70 kilobyte page. They've already used up 70 kilobytes before they've done anything. Like that's React is 42. The router is another 10. Maybe something like a React query, Axios. Like all you basically just add the libraries you need to display a static page, and you're over 70 kilobytes before you've written a single line of code.
And here you have routing built in already in the app. It already, right?
You don't really have routing built in, right? You're just serving separate pages, right? So you're relying on the browser for the routing,
exactly.
Yeah.
But it provides you the API to fetch to get the parameters and to get to break the URL down into segments. So like we did with the ID, or was it story? We used the story instead of ID.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you noticed, I never touched the anchor tags. Right from the beginning, I just copied and pasted from the existing app, and the anchor tags already just worked as they were. I never touched the anchor tags.
This is cool. And I was also going to say that it already supports server-side rendering by default. It's like built in. You don't have to use some other framework to like enhance it. And I was thinking like, okay, what if you want to use like Prisma? Like, for example, there is this framework Blitz that I was using for one of the pet projects that already kind of combines Next.js with Prisma, so you get the data layer, you can communicate with the database, and it feels like it could be sort of easily implemented on Marko as well.
Yeah, because remember I made this API JS. This is some stuff that in our case is just running on the server. So if you replace this with Prisma and go like database or fetch MySQL and just literally just wrote this into here, the rest of this would just work. Like because Marko's server first, and as long as you aren't like kind of similar to React server component rules, but as long as your component isn't stateful, it's not going to be in the browser. So you can just define your APIs, define your Prisma, whatever, data fetching, and it should just work.
Fantastic. And we have a question, which I also had. Will we have this code example available? Will you provide me the link to the demo? I would really love to share it with the viewers.
Yeah. And actually, this one was like my kind of hack together. The full demo is actually available. I have it on my GitHub, like already fully published. And let me see, HackerNews, not that one.
But I also think it's valuable to explore exactly this one that you wrote today, because then we have the video where people can just follow along as you type in, and then they can just open it and try launching it and just try to tweak it.
It's very, very, very similar. I guess I named layout differently, but this is what we did today. Like I just remade this demo. It is pretty much identical. So this is the one you probably want. I did extract out stories and stuff, but essentially this is exactly. Oh, it uses the old path syntax. I'll update this demo, but essentially this is the demo, the same one.
Is it super similar? Like can it be mapped directly to what happened today on the stream?
Yes.
I'm just worried about like people to be lost in the demo, even though it's super simple.
No, like this is like I used the same API. That's where I pulled it from, and this should look very similar to the code we used today. There's just a couple more things in it, but all just it's all the same stuff.
Okay, then I will add it to the video description.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just coming back around. I guess I'm still sharing my screen. Yeah. If there isn't any other specific questions, I don't know if there's anything else.
No, not really. We didn't really have many questions today, but I think it's fine. Yeah, there was one person who noticed that favicon is from Solid.js. I guess that's because of the cache, because it runs on the same port, right?
Yeah, we didn't set a favicon for this example, so it's just using a cached favicon from.
Yeah, sorry about that. Let's see if I can load up the actual. This is the one that I deployed to Heroku and whatnot. Oh, yeah, look how fast that loading was. Anyways, this is you can see the actual demo deployed without it. There is no fav icon, but yeah.
Also, please send me this link. I will add it to the description as well, so that people can check it out. The demo and the code, both things.
Yeah, they're actually linked right off of each other. But I will send you that in our private chat here. Perfect.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for this demo. I'm actually honestly quite impressed, and now I'm thinking that it's really the way to solve a whole class of problems. Like if you just need a website, as you said, like e-commerce, or maybe even some education platform, if it's like a simple like course platform, it feels like it would fit really, really well. Does it support something like? Okay, wait a second. So, for example, for my platform, I was using Next.js, and it's easy to use MDX, where I can have Markdown and have embedded React components. What about Markdown support in Marko or something similar?
So we don't have anything first class. There actually is an example, I think, in our language guide of building a Markdown component that parses the Markdown inside of it at compile time. I do, and so this Marko serve example that we're using, it doesn't have any Markdown support right now. We do actually use it for our website. We translate the Markdown documents in the Marko repo to HTML just using marked, and then run it through the Marko compiler. And we have a custom marked renderer that actually like swaps or uses some Markdown syntax to create certain components for like our code blocks and some other things like that. So you actually do get a Markdown document that's rendering a Marko template with dynamic components in it. So it's possible. It's not super easy now. And that is something that I'm wanting to add, so that you could just like write Markdown documents in the Marko serve application and serve them. We may get that eventually.
That would be fantastic. But now all the heavy lifting would be done on the backend, where you would parse the Markdown, as I imagine, and then it would be just the data that you pass to the page.
Right. So you would essentially just end up with a Markdown file getting converted to a Marko template, which then gets compiled to the resulting JavaScript. So at runtime, there wouldn't be any Markdown parsing or anything happening.
What about images and other kind of static assets? Like it loads the CSS by convention.
It loads the CSS by convention. You can. So it really depends. The Marko serve. I'll talk in terms of that, because that's kind of the battery included approach. If you wanted to set it up yourself, it would just be however your bundler is going to pick up assets. But Marko serve allows you to just like import files into the template and then use those URLs, just like, because it's using Webpack. So it just uses the Webpack file loader. It also does have some special attributes that it watches. So like you can put like just an image tag with a source to a file on disk, and it'll pull that in as well. So there's a little custom attribute handler for native DOM nodes that reference assets.
Which actually is a good point to bring up. Marko supports, a few different bundlers. We actually have a Vite set up as well, which has hot client and server hot reloading, which is kind of cool. We're still working with the team, Vite team, to kind of iron out some of the issues and kind of edge cases we hit because of Marko, but it's quite likely that we might see incorporating Vite as part of our main starter in the future. We're just kind of still working through those details. And that gives a bundler, gives you a lot of handling of different files just out of the box, because it's kind of configured to work that way.
Nice.
Yeah. But kind of going back a bit, what you were saying about a certain class of site, and you're just kind of viewing this, kind of picturing this kind of scenario. You're not the only one, and we're not the only one. It's kind of funny. Marko's been doing this, I said, for a very long time, and it built off this ability to stream content and do partial hydration automatically. That was like the fundamentals when it was built back 2013, 14. And we see stuff like React server components and React 18 bringing some of these features into single page apps, but it's not quite the same, because you need a certain amount of JavaScript to drive it from the client instead of the server. So like they don't quite overlap on use case. At least today. But I think, others are starting to kind of feel this too, right? We've been building SPA frameworks for a long time. And, while there's Sveltes, Solves of the world and Preact that are really, really small, compiler approach kind of mitigates the problem of like having to pull everything in, to make it work. You can kind of do aggressive tree shaking. There is still benefit, especially for large apps, of that kind of mostly static variety of taking this MPA approach and not including that JavaScript. And as I said, if you've been paying attention to stuff like Astro recently, which lets you kind of do that with React, people are looking into this again. It's surprising to me that it's taken this long, considering, as I said, Marko, what I showed you today, you could have done a Marko like 4 or 5 years ago. Like it just
history goes in a spiral. Like we're going back and forth in a way.
Right, and the big thing is, and kind of mission we've been having here with Marko, was to provide that single app UX. You notice you just built the app, and you weren't really thinking about it. You're just like, oh, okay, I'm going to fetch some data, build some templates, add some JavaScript. You weren't like, okay, this is on the server, this is on the client. As you get advanced cases, you do need to think about it. But a lot of our work is actually trying to smooth out that mental transition, and that's like the better hydration will do that, better static analysis will do that. And as I said, we're seeing these other libraries, like people should check out Elder is another one, Elder JS, Astro, kind of just getting the static parts of it. Like you can use Marko to generate static sites, but like as you saw today, the real power is when you have dynamic sites. That content is fresh that we were pulling up in there. We were showing placeholders, and we were doing all of that without loading a whole ton of JavaScript on your page. And we even let you sprinkle some interactivity on with, again, fairly minimal JavaScript, only as you needed it.
What about caching? So, for example, let's say at 4 p.m. the API endpoint for the page number 2 will return one set of pages, and then you cache by the page ID. Or like how can we reduce the burden on the server with these kind of applications?
So you can do regular HTTP caching. That is one option. There is also a cached fragment that I honestly would not recommend using at this point in time. We actually don't even include it in the documentation because there are some weird edge cases around it that need to be addressed and will be addressed in our next version. But that does allow you to cache like specific portions of the page. So if you had that async tag under a cache fragment, you could set a cache key and only remake that request when that cache key changes for some reason or the cache expires. So that is a more advanced use case and something that we're going to be investing a bit more in the future. For right now, it's not something I would recommend doing, and we typically just use HTTP headers to do caching, based on that.
And the streamed output from a Marko HTML will replay properly. So like if you just want some kind of really naive caching strategy, like you could serve back the same page, I imagine, and it would play back correctly. Like you're not streaming again, but it would just execute the same way because we're just writing script tags to the page.
Right, and I guess it is worth mentioning you can use Marko to build a static site. The Marko documentation is using this Marko serve setup, the same one we just used for the HackerNews. It does call some dynamic endpoints, and we just build that before we deploy. So it calls those endpoints at build time, and just whatever the data is, that's what gets cached and uploaded to GitHub pages. It's basically, there is no invalidation except for us doing another build and deploy, but you still can have, dynamic data cached like that. And for our purposes, it's not super important. We're pulling in like the contributors from the GitHub API. If you go to the bottom of the docs page, it'll tell you, who's contributed to that document. So that's all dynamic, but it's all cached at build time.
Got it. Okay, there is another good question about the CMS support, for example, Strapi. Like, are there examples of how to integrate with CMS?
We do not have any first-party examples of that. You would have to check if there's any out in the community, but it is going to look pretty similar to the API that Ryan set up. You're going to call Strapi's API. It'll return promises for content, and you'll use the await tag to actually get that into the template. And that's the way that we would recommend doing that. We do recommend passing, promises and, getting promises in the template rather than resolving all that data ahead of time, like most frameworks do with like, get initial state or something like that, where the async happens before you start rendering. And that allows Marko to stream the content out to the users as fast as possible.
What about the user land of Marko? So for example, for React and hooks, there are tons of libraries providing all sorts of additional functionality through the hooks, and before that it was through hooks and like other kind of components. What about Marko? Do people already create libraries on top of that?
Marko has a smaller community. You are not going to find as much out there, and the things that you are going to find out there, I mean, I find this in the React community as well, a little bit less so now with hooks, but the components that you're going to find out there, we've got the eBay UI core components that, if you build using those, your site's going to look similar to the eBay design system. Gov.uk has a set of Marko components. So you're going to find a lot of what you're going to find out there are a set of components that conform to different company style guides. That's a lot of what you see in the Marko community, which if you're not trying to build something that looks like that may not be super useful to you. I expect once we get the tags API going, we're going to find more kind of generic components that are, I guess, headless in a sense, right? That's a term that the React community is using, where there's not this design that's tied to the components. And I think we'll be able to have more components out in our community that are usable in more scenarios.
I was thinking more of some sort of libraries that would provide additional functionality rather than, you were talking more about the components
Right.
that are styled in a certain way. I was thinking more of like, I can't come up with any examples. And for instance, Apollo, that allows you to work with GraphQL. It has, for example, wrapper for React that allows you to use hooks to fetch, to perform queries and mutations. What about Marko? Do similar things exist for that?
I am not aware of a wrapper for Apollo. I would say there's not a ton of those out in the wild. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
It's interesting, right? Because like I've seen some wrappers for like Redux or MobX, some state libraries, and Apollo is a data service library. But I think what you see here is with Marko, because of the whole MPA view and the like straddling the client to server from the beginning, it's made it interesting or different challenge. Like when people created those wrappers or those libraries, they were trying to solve a specific problem. Marko's solution there would have to be different almost right from the get-go. We're only starting now to see people kind of play with this idea, with isomorphic rendering and stuff. You got to figure out with Marko, if your mentality is, okay, I'm going to mostly render on the server. I mean, there's just been more emphasis on like, you'll see when you look at the docs and there's some stuff like different integrations with like Fastify or Happy or like different server technology kind of stuff, because a lot of people using Marko are going to be doing a lot of the data loading on the server and streaming it, which is a really performant way to get the page out. I think that there is room for client-side state libraries, obviously, but any approach there would require slightly different thinking, because you'd want it to actually be isomorphic, not just client-side. You want it to actually render on the server as well as the client to really leverage that. And I think, as I said, this is kind of newer territory for those libraries. And I think this has been actually honestly a challenge with Marko, because people coming in, this different sort of like the world was very different 5 years ago, and especially on the client side. Now it's kind of converging, and we're starting to see libraries and support. But before that, Marko was kind of working in a zone that literally almost no one was in. So the libraries, like people weren't like thinking of libraries that way.
I think we're going to see some of this addressed with React 18 too. And I think the React community is going to feel a little bit of this pain as well as they transition into that. One of the things I've noticed with a lot of React libraries and libraries that, maybe have generic APIs that aren't React specific, but are they were essentially built to be used with React when they were created. You don't have a good way to get the data out of those things that you need. And so that's kind of vague. Let me give like an example. You might have like a CSS and JS library that gives you, say, the critical CSS to inline into the page, right? And the way that it does that is it actually just gathers data as it's rendering, and then gives you basically the critical CSS that you need when it's done rendering. That doesn't mesh well with a streaming approach, because we need that critical CSS sooner than the entire page is done rendering. And so I think as React 18 gets into streaming as well, we're going to see the need to address some of these challenges at the core library level. We need the critical CSS for what's been rendered so far, right? And so, yeah, I'm interested to see how this plays out, and I think this actually will make it easier for us to have some library integrations with other things as well.
I mean, we've seen this with bundlers. Like Marko used to run off its own bundler, Lasso, and that we built ourselves, because it let you bundle on demand, like in dev mode, like or production, but like as code changed and as requests came in, we basically at runtime bundled what was needed. I'm hoping I'm representing it right. And it's really powerful, but obviously no one else was using this. And this kind of features didn't exist in other bundlers, but it was important to how we used Marko. And, when you looked at the, Webpack and trying to get it to work and kind of have this dance between the client and server bundlers and all this, no one was really thinking the way we were approaching the problem. So there wasn't really good tools, and we ended up building our own. But I mean, Vite and Snowpack in the last year have kind of come around, and now they're actually like focusing on SSR experiences into the bundler and stuff. And there's still gaps and things we're working through, which is what I was mentioning earlier, why we haven't kind of completely moved over. But like Vite might be the closest thing to Lasso in a sense that we've seen, and that it took us 7 years to get here. It's not because of anything being more advanced, just like focusing on completely different patterns and problems at the time. And it's only now that a lot of the problems that have been important to Marko are actually getting mainstream focus.
Got it. That's an interesting future that awaits. I'm really eager to start playing with Marko, exploring it. I saw a bunch of things that really caught my attention, like this control flow organization. I would like to try to make, for example, specialized component to make GraphQL requests, like you did API requests, and why not pass, for example, a JQL query? How would it be this be done there? And I'm interested in how those directives, the what is it, parameters or I'm still attributes. Yeah, I'm kind of still lost in
language barriers. And honestly, with the tags API that we're working on, we've actually streamlined a ton in this regard. And I'm hoping that we can actually explain it as just 2 or 3 extensions of native HTML that just give us so much power.
This is, for example, this is important for me with the frameworks. I try to choose ones with the least amount of terms. For example, if I compare Enzyme with React Testing Library, I would choose React Testing Library, just way less terms. Same with Redux sagas that I would avoid because they have so many different sagas there. And I'm just trying to understand, like, how many terms does Marko have? How many different moving parts what are the building blocks that I have to learn? But maybe that's a topic for another video, because today we had this great demo of HackerNews website. I'm gonna add the demo itself and the code for this demo to the video description. I should also, I found Michael on Twitter, so I'm gonna add your Twitter, Michael, to the video description as well, if you don't mind. And it would be nice if you could just keep your eye for one day for the comment section. If people ask something valuable, just try to reply. That would be awesome.
For sure. We'll do that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was a really interesting demo.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you for watching. You can, as I said, for one day, probably the guys will reply to your questions in the comments. Thank you for joining in. Goodbye.